We're having one or two technical problems here, as you may have heard, or not heard, as that might be. You're welcome to the second session of West End Resilience Live. We're here to celebrate the strength and the resilience of the West End and to keep you informed about the trends and the policies that will help shape the future of the district. Today, we'll be looking to the future with a view from Parliament with our local MP, Nickie Aiken. You can put your questions to her by clicking on the question mark icon that you should be able to see on your webinar window right now. Before we welcome her, I'm going to hand over to Jace Tyrrell, Chief Executive at the New West End Company. Jace, we had one or two problems with the technical side of things, but are you hearing us loud and clear now?
Hopefully you can hear me now. I think
yes.
I'm unmuted, we're back on. So welcome everyone, as Martin says, to our second West End Resilience Live. Great to see so many of our West Enders back from last week, and also a lot more that have been able to join us today. As we know from the launch event last week, this focus is around resilience, and resilience in three areas. Firstly, resilience of you, our West End family members who are currently going through both this health and economic crisis, and your well-being and physical well-being of personal resilience. Secondly, about your West End business and how that can be resilient as we move through the current period. And thirdly, which is the topic of today, of how the West End can be really resilient, and both during the current lockdown and as we move into the recovery phase, it's going to be more important than ever that we continue to work as a West End community and family through that. So I'm really pleased that our West End MP, who's the former leader of Westminster Council, has been able to make the time to join us today. I have to say, Nickie has worked tirelessly with the West End business community, with the residents and wider partners to really work with us through the lockdown and the current period, almost speaking daily in those first couple of weeks to make all our representations to Parliament and to the government. And as we come on this journey in the road to recovery, it's going to be more important, this partnership with the government, with our political community and the West End business community. So I hope today we'll hear some of those first cues on how we come out of this, the West End resilience. And again, really grateful for all the support that Nickie Aiken has given to us as we work through this together. Martin, back to you.
Jace, thank you for that. In a moment, I will be introducing our guest, Nickie Aiken, MP, the MP for Cities of London and Westminster. But before I do that, just a reminder that we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions to Nickie. In order to put the questions that you want to Nickie, you could just click on the question mark icon that you should be able to see on your webinar window now. So to our guest, Nickie has been an MP since December last year and also sits on the Backbench Business Committee and the Women and Equalities Committee. Prior to becoming an MP, Nickie was the leader of Westminster City Council, where she introduced a number of reforms, including increasing transparency in the planning system, pioneering an initiative to help improve the life choices of young people, and she introduced a campaign to try and improve air quality. She's now worked in Westminster for over a decade and seen the West End evolve into the international centre that it is today. Today, Nickie is here to talk about the government's response to the pandemic and what they are doing to help businesses, as well as giving an insight into what the future might look like when we exit lockdown. Nickie, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks for everybody for joining today. I know that we live in very unprecedented times, very strange times for many, or if not all of us. We're working from home, we're working with children by our sides. We are juggling life as we have never known it before. I have been very clear from the start that I'm here to represent the constituents, the people who live in Westminster, but also the businesses, because I am very aware that the West End is the heart of UK PLC. It is the engine of the economy, and we must do all we can to ensure that when we are out of lockdown, and hopefully we will start to see lockdown begin to be lifted in the not too distant future, I know that it is you in the West End and in the City of London, obviously across my constituency, that will be playing a major part in the recovery. That's why I thought it was very, very important from the very start of this crisis that I work closely with the businesses as well as the residents. That's why I've been holding a weekly conference call with both sides to talk about the different issues. And as Jay said in his introduction, I have found it so vital for me to know from the horse's mouth, if you like, from business organisations, from your bids, how the particular issues are affecting you. I know things like business rates and the cap that the Chancellor introduced initially in the budget, which seemed such a long time ago now, and then with the emergency schemes that he introduced and the £51,000 cap. We all know that £51,000 business rates does not really cover much of my constituency. I think the UK hospitality industry, Kate Nichols, who has been absolutely outstanding, I have to say, as well. I think she told me that 9% of hospitality premises in my constituency reach the £51,000 business rate threshold. So I know what we're dealing with. So that's been one of my main emphasis, is to really push the government on that. You know, we are getting some places with some of the things we're asking, but not all. I do think the government has responded extremely well so far. Yes, there's been issues with PPE and testing and issues like that. But if you think about what we have achieved in such a short time and the schemes that the Chancellor has put in place, temporary, but they are targeted and they have been fast. I also understand that there have been frustrations from many people, many businesses accessing the loan system and the grants. But I know that from Westminster City Council's point of view, they have been able to get out all their grants out of the door very, very quickly. On the loans, I know the banks have not perhaps been as helpful and maybe been a bit too stringent, but I think that as we've been being able to push ministers on this, they have responded and they have gone back to the banks. And I hope we will now, particularly this week, see more and more loans out the door. Obviously, this week we also saw the establishment of the job retention scheme with the furloughing. And again, it's incredible that this has happened so quickly. So yes, there have been frustrations. There will always be frustrations in issues like this. I am very conscious that this pandemic is not just a health crisis, it's also an economic crisis, and it's an ongoing economic crisis. And things will not return to normal anytime soon, even when the lockdown is lifted. I think we have to be realistic about that. That's why I've said to the New West End Company and other business organisations that I'm working with that I expect our regular calls to be going on for the next 12 to 18 months, because I do think there will be issues that arise when we begin to come out of the lockdown, which we can't really foresee now. We need a tapering, I think, of the lockdown so that we can encourage people back into the West End. We can encourage staff and workers to come back into the West End. I'm hoping to be talking to Heidi Alexander in the not too distant future about how transport can play a part in building confidence and getting people back into the West End. So thank you, all of you, for what you're doing during this crisis. I know it hasn't been easy. I know many of you are very concerned about the future of your companies, but thank you for your understanding. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for being involved in the effort, because this is going to be something that will last for a while and we are in this together. But I am determined that I will do everything I can to safeguard the reputation of the West End and also hopefully enhance it once we come out of this.
Nickie, thank you for that. Just a reminder that you can put your questions to Nickie, whatever the subject you would like to ask her about. Do please put those questions to her. You can do that by clicking on that question mark icon and then typing away your question. Let's go to the first one here from Simon Thomas from the Hippodrome. When we are allowed to reopen, it's clear that demand will take time to grow and we will not need or be able to afford all our staff until demand recovers. Do you feel we will be able to keep some on furlough, or should we be making redundancy plans?
This is what I was just saying in my introduction, Simon. This is one of the issues that we started to discuss yesterday, and it's something that we will continue to discuss on the business calls in the coming weeks. I think you make a very good point. There can't be a cliff edge on the furlough scheme. It's going to be having to be tapered. That's my message to the Chancellor, and I will be working with New West End Company and others to put together a paper on how we do manage this recovery, because it is vital that it is managed as safely and as responsibly as possible. And I do see a system where the furlough scheme will have to continue for several months, but being tapered as we go along.
One from John here. How do you envisage the lockdown ending in the West End?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Sorry.
So the question is, how do you envisage the lockdown ending in the West End?
Well, I think it will be gradual. I don't think there'll be an immediate switch. I think the government, or I know the government is working through its plans now. I'm hoping that I can persuade the ministers to start listening more to business, particularly retailers, as we decide how we can best work together to introduce the recovery. It's got to be done in a sensible way, but it's also got to be done in a confident way. If we don't, then I think we could cause more concern than anything. And again, that's why it goes back to working with transport. We've got to ensure that there are tubes and trains available, but they're not overcrowded, because that is going to put people off from coming into town, and it's also going to put off workers and staff. So I think it's about doing it sensibly, but in a measured way.
We've got one here from Jessica. I think it's similar to the one that we've just had, but there might be a different point that you want to make. The point that she's wanting to put is what has to be done to make those who work in the West End and our customers feel confident enough to return?
Well, I think we're going to have to start with trying to gain the confidence of the people in Westminster and people in central London first. I think we all have to realise we are not going to see international visitors into London, into the United Kingdom very much this year. I think we will start to see a proper recovery of the international market this time next year, but I think we have to be realistic, and we are not going to see the visitor numbers that we would expect anytime this year. So therefore, I think we need to be concentrating on our own domestic market, and I think we should be concentrating on London first and then growing it out. And that is why we need to be working with the Mayor's Office and TfL and others, London First, to establish communication programmes and campaigns that really do gain people's confidence to come back into London. And I think if we can show that London is open, that will gain more confidence for people outside of London and then into Europe and then internationally. But it's going to be I think it's going to be a steady progress.
OK, one from Robert here. How do you think that COVID-19 will change the West End, and what should we be doing differently?
Well, I think from a work point of view, I think many of us now know that we can work from home quite successfully, as long as our children are at school, I think, particularly. I think there will be a change to people's attitudes to work. There'll be more flexibility. I think companies can be more flexible now because they know people can work from home. When it comes to the mainstay of the West End, the leisure and the retail sectors, I think that we will see a real fall in numbers even in the next 6 months, and we have to really gain people's trust again and provide an experience. More and more people now are shopping online anyway, and therefore we've got to work together, the theatres, the retailers and the pubs and restaurants and hotels, to really provide a West End package, if you like, why you should come to the West End. It's not just about retail, but retail is an important part. So I think it is about a team effort and perhaps re-establishing how the fantastic different offers in the West End.
OK, there's one here from Brian Bickle. Business rate reform is long overdue, and like many other challenges, the coronavirus is accelerating the need to address the problem. How can we be using this time to start the debate with government to find a replacement to what he describes as an obsolete levy?
Well, Brian, you know that I have had a lot to say about business rates over the years. I think it is a tax that is no longer fit for purpose. It is based on out of date, irrelevant tax system now, I think, and I would like to see a complete reform of it. I think the government have, before the COVID crisis, I think the government had already understood that. My conversations I've had with Rishi when he was First Secretary to the Treasury, he understood that, as did Sajid when he was Chancellor. So I think we are knocking at an open door. And I think once we come out of this crisis, there will be a need for fundamental reform, not just of business rate tax, but also of council tax and the way that we fund local authorities, full stop. And I think that the way that business rates are reformed will help in council tax reform as well.
I think you've kind of answered this question, but I'm going to put it to you again, just in case there's anything that you want to add, but clearly don't feel that you have to say anything if you feel like you've answered it already. It's from Susan, and the point she says is our international visitors are unlikely to return into the West End until next year. How is the government going to support our shops, theatres and hotels until this time?
Well, as I said earlier, I think there will be a tapering of relief. I think that we will have to concentrate on the domestic market first, because I think that I just don't see international travellers coming back in the numbers that we have seen previously. I also think that we've got to be very conscious of how our Chinese visitors will feel travelling internationally at the moment, where there's quite a lot of anti-Chinese government feeling in many corners of the media in particular, and that might have a knock-on effect for Chinese citizens feeling they feel confident enough to travel outside of China. So I think we have to be very conscious of that. So the government will have to ensure that there is the relief and the measures in place that will continue to support the hospitality industry, the retail industry, in the next 12 months. I have no doubt that it's going to take at least 12 months to even see the green shoots of recovery.
One here from Julie: will government be supporting us on obtaining rent-free periods for particular industries who will be hardest hit, such as hospitality? How will that support come, and what do you imagine it should look like?
Well, I think this is a very interesting issue that you raised, because I've actually written a letter to the Chancellor today, which will be being sent out this afternoon, in conjunction with the New West End Company and others, where we are asking the Chancellor to really look at the relationship between landlords and tenants at the moment. I think we have to understand that landlords have got businesses themselves to run, and that they may be deferring rents for the time being. Obviously, tenants have got major issues because they're not bringing any money in. My message has been very clear to both landlords and tenants: work together on this. Do not take it as opportunities on either side to play games and not to pay your rent because you don't want to. It's a very different thing if you can't. But I have had issues raised with me with landlords who've got major tenants who are still working, who are trying to use this as an excuse not to pay their rent. That is unacceptable, because that means landlords can't then help those who really need that relief and the even maybe rent holidays. So it's never black and white. I've always learned this in politics. An issue is never black and white. There's always a grey area, but it's about ensuring that landlords know that they can't use this COVID emergency as an opportunity to get rid of a tenant they don't want to keep. And I would suggest to landlords that they might not want to get rid of any tenants at the moment, because it's going to be quite difficult to find new ones anytime soon. And it's also up to tenants to work constructively with their landlords to find a way that fits their business, but then also means that they can keep their tenancy. A
really interesting point here from Fabrizio, who asked the question: or makes the suggestion that Oxford Street could be pedestrianised as a way of enabling social distancing. What are your thoughts on that?
My views on pedestrianisation of Oxford Street has been very, very clear over the last 2 years. I begun a war of attrition with the Mayor of London at the time, so I think I don't need to go down that route anymore.
Well, forgive us, because I'm not aware of that. So,
I don't know where you've been, Martin. But
what's your position? What is your position? Are you against it or in favour of it? I'm
against pedestrianisation of Oxford Street. That's why I called it off.
Yeah, and the reality of social distancing wouldn't make you look back and review that?
No, I mean, no, it's not about pedestrianisation. There's hardly any traffic around at the moment. One of the good things about this emergency, if you can find any positives out of this emergency, is the air quality has improved, and I think it shows. What I'm calling the Mayor to do is to have car-free or vehicle-free days several times a month, and that includes working days as well. I think we need to take this as an opportunity to really think about our green agenda, our air quality, and see how we can work together to ensure that some days we don't have any vehicles at all in West End.
Okay, message here question from Nicola from JLL. What measures should be put in place to help the West End prepare quickly should this happen again?
Well, I hope it's not going to happen again. But I mean, but Nicola, you make a good point, because we could have a situation, if we don't resolve this first peak, that if we don't manage it properly, then we could have further peaks, and that's the last thing any of us need, and that's one of the things that the government is doing all it can to avoid, because I think that would really set us back. But I do think in all these situations, all crises, you always learn more from what didn't work than did work. I do think, from my point of view, I'm learning that we have to listen to business. We have to listen to those on the front line in the West End to understand what is required from the government and from places like the GLA, TfL, the Mayor's office, about how we can work together to have a successful recovery and to have a confident recovery. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to set up a working group with West End businesses, with government ministers, to make sure that they do get a voice at the table.
One which is anonymous. I'm hoping this will be clear to you in terms of what they're asking about. It might be worth unpacking a little bit for people that are not aware about the specifics of this. But the question is, do you agree with the WPA's letter to government asking for the ability to renegotiate previously agreed affordable housing commitments on new developments?
No.
Straightforward answer. Can you unpack a little bit about what they mean in terms of the WPA's letter, for maybe people that don't fully understand that question, and so that they know the background?
It will go back to the issue that in Westminster we have been changing the way we well, I say we, it's not me anymore, but when I was leader, and it's a bit unfair now because obviously I'm not the leader anymore, and it's up to Councillor Robertson to really take this forward. But there has been, there was under, before I became leader, an issue with commercial properties not providing the affordable home numbers that we required in central London to resolve the housing crisis. I absolutely understand that in this crisis now, property developers will be under the cosh even more, but that doesn't mean that we don't have any less people waiting on our housing lists. So we are going to have to make this happen. We do need more affordable housing. One of the things I'm most proud of, as having been leader of the council, was starting the largest council home building programme for a generation, because we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people waiting for new homes in overcrowded conditions. So there's always going to be a bone of contention between the property industry and local authorities on this point. But I am confident that working together we can do this, but I am not of the belief that we should be doing anything to cut the number of affordable housing that we desperately need.
Thank you for sort of unpacking that for those people that perhaps need a little bit more explanation. Question here from Tony Nash from Holborn. What can you or will you be doing with the London Mayor to try and progress recovery? How are you going to work together?
Well, I get on very well with the Mayor. We've had our disagreements in the past, but I've always had a fairly robust, constructive relationship with him. I've been in touch with him over recent weeks on things like road safety and pavement safety. And I do think that I will be working closely with him. And it is about a team effort, as I said earlier. We can't do this in silos. We have got to work with the Mayor, with the West End business community, with government ministers. I've been working very closely with the Retail Industries Minister, Paul Scully, who I know many of you have been working closely with. And he is really listening, and he has done some excellent pieces of work on our behalf. And he will certainly be part of the recovery solution here as well.
One here from Max Whitaker who asks, in a time when landlords are being asked or often required to give rent holidays or rent-free periods to our occupiers, we are also unable to carry out planned building or refurbishment works and may well see increased vacancies. This is leading to a large empty rates liability over a longer period at a time when income is severely hampered. Do you see any government concessions being granted on empty property rates?
It's something that I would certainly be taking forward. I think that's a very, very good point. I think that's one of the points I made earlier about landlords and tenants working closely together to find constructive and workable solutions on individual premises, because if you lose a tenant, I'm not sure you're going to find a new one anytime soon. And so I think it's in all our interest to work together on this. And I do think you're right, and we will have to start looking at empty properties, but also at the whole business rate scheme anyway, which, as I said before, is not fit for purpose. And I think this is an opportunity now to really shake up the system. However, I would say is that we will continue to have taxes and to raise taxes if we are going to pay for this, and we are going to pay for the services that we will require moving on anyway.
One here from Shirley Collins. Will business be given good notice on the return to work transition, e.g. how transport will work, whether we will need masks, who will be the first phase of return to work, essential workers, etc. Business can only set scenarios at present, but need to put plans into practice. You're
absolutely right. And that's what the basis of a lot of my call with the business community yesterday featured. I am determined that we've got to make sure that there is a planned return to work, and it's got to be managed properly. We just can't have the tap turned back on. It's just not going to work. So you're absolutely right, and it is one of the issues that is now at the top of my agenda.
One here from David Shaw. The retail industry, the BRC, and the property industry, the BPF, have put forward proposals of government financial support of retail rents. Do you support this initiative?
I don't know anything about it, so I'll have to look at it.
OK, straightforward answer there. One from Matthew. Do you expect to see a shift in transport modelling and perhaps more focus on cycling? Other cities are now investing in cycling and have closed roads in their cities. We know your view on pedestrianisation of Oxford Street, but to be used only by cyclists and pedestrians. Is this an opportunity to shift personal transport to cycling and thus improve air quality? I think I know what your answer is, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to Matthew directly.
Well, Matthew, I think you're right. And I think there is going to be changes like this. I think there will be an awful lot of confidence issues from workers and also visitors on using the tube and the rail network for some time to come. I know there's a huge debate about masks. If the government advice is to wear masks, then we are going to have to look about the supply of masks. We've already seen that there's issues with providing PPE, the amount that's needed. We've provided over 1 billion pieces of PPE over the last few weeks. And if citizens are expected to wear them as well, there is going to be an issue. So we've got to look at that. But I do think when we see the response to major crises like this, that there's always a change for some time. It might not be forever, but there's always a change in people's behaviour. So we saw after 7/7 and the failed bombing 3 weeks later, that people stopped using the tube for a while, and we saw an awful lot more cyclists, and many of those cycles have continued. I think the expansion of the cycle superhighways means that more and more people can cycle. So, you know, what's not to like about more people cycling and walking and improving our air quality?
Okay, let's have a look at a question from Ollie from Primark. Are retailers going to get any guidance from the government about how many customers will be allowed on our premises at one time?
I have no doubt that there will be full guidance, and I'm sure that, as I said, the Retail Minister, Paul Scully, will be taking this forward along with his BEIS colleagues, and working with the retail industry on this to make this workable. It's got to be workable. We've seen that there were teething problems with the supermarkets, but I think that's been mostly resolved now, and I have no doubt that we can do the same for other retail, such as clothes shops.
Interesting one here from Julie. Are licensing laws likely or able to be relaxed to help the hospitality industry? How do you imagine that could look like? For example, extended hours outdoor drinking.
Well, having previously been the licensing chair of Westminster, I can tell you that it's a huge balance when you are granting licenses for premises, because and I used to always say that I used to get it in the neck from the industry, and I used to get it in the neck from residents, so I must be doing it about right, because I wasn't making anybody happy, and it is that balance. I don't see the ability to relax and have longer drinking hours, I'm afraid, and longer extended outside drinking in residential areas. There may be scope for it in non-residential areas, but certainly Westminster itself and the city as well have got high concentrations of residents in certain areas, and the Licensing Act it does protect the amenity of residents' lives. So it's a balance, and I'm not sure it would really necessarily work in tandem with residents and longer hours.
One here from Paul. The West End is designated an international centre. What does that mean to you? What's your vision for the West End?
Well, one of the things I've been working with the new West End company on, and something that I am minded to support, is because we are an international designated international centre, we do attract in our usual times international visitors, people from China, people from the Middle East in particular, who have different hours. They prefer to come out later in the day and eat later in the night. And I've been talking to the new West End company about extending the shopping hours on a Sunday. I think it's vital that we protect Sunday mornings. I think they are a very precious part of Britain's culture. But as life changes, and as our younger generations like to go out shopping later, and our international visitors do, I do think we should be looking at extending our shopping hours from 6 to 8 on a Sunday. Now, I know there'll be residents groups who are very concerned about that, and I will absolutely understand that, but I think it's a balance again, that if we can make it work and maybe do it temporary and see how it works, that would be, I think, a huge boost for the economy. And it would also not just help retail, but it would also have a knock-on effect for the hospitality industry. And so that's one of the things I think, as it being a designated international centre, I think that's one of the reasons why we should be looking at this.
One from Julie. There's been a tremendous global response to the COVID crisis. We've seen what action looks like. We've not seen the same response to climate crisis declared by so many cities in the UK to be an emergency. How do you see the climate crisis being addressed?
You make a very good point, and I think it was very sobering to see the satellite photographs of China in February and March, when it was obviously in lockdown and the air quality improved. And we've seen it here in central London. I live in central London. I've lived in central London for over 20 years. And I have noticed, and I don't know whether many of you who are in central London at the moment have noticed, how bright the sky is. It is incredibly bright. And I wonder whether that's got something to do with the fact that there's very little traffic. And that really does send a message to me about how important it is that we continue on this fight to improve our air quality, but also take on the challenge of climate change. We've now got an opportunity. We do know that when the world works together, we can effect change. And I do hope something positive like us coming together now on climate change will come out of the crisis.
Something slightly lighter here from Christy. What's the thing you most like about the West End?
Gosh.
They're often the most difficult, those ones, aren't they?
Because I like it all. I mean, I like the buzz. I like the fact. I'm very proud of the fact that it is the West End and it is the epitome of what is central London. It's about the West End. It's the vibe. I love Soho. I love the community there, Fitzrovia, and then going into parts of like Carnaby Street. And I know Brian Bickle's listening, but I do love Carnaby Street. I love the fact that it's a real mixture of the big retail companies, but also those independents. And I think what we've really achieved over the last 10 or 20 years is really the West End has really put London on the global stage when it comes to restaurants. And I think that's something to be really proud of. And that's probably what I'm most proud of, actually. And what I like about is the restaurant vibe.
I'm with you on that one. Question here from Dan. Do you think there should be, essentially the point he's making, should there be a greater investment in public services like the police to sort of help managing social distancing and all the rest of it when we come out of lockdown?
Well, we've already seen a huge increase in investment into policing, in particular, 20,000 new police officers into the UK, or into England anyway, England and Wales, under Boris Johnson. And I think the West End and Westminster in particular have the benefit of that, because the police officers in London tend to come from Hendon straight into the West End because it's the best type of training they can get. But I do think we were starting to see much more of investment from this Conservative government into public services. The issue now, and I'm very conscious of this, is that we're spending an awful lot of money. I know that your businesses are under a lot of pressure from the taxes you've got to pay and the business rates you've got to pay, but we need tax receipts to pay for these public services. So it's a real balance.
Question here from someone who wishes to remain anonymous, or maybe just doesn't fill their name in. They are asking whether there will be a delay to Crossrail, or suggesting that there shouldn't be a delay to Crossrail, and asking if you can confirm that there won't be a delay to Crossrail.
Well, I've actually I'm meant to be having a call with the chief exec in the next couple of days, so I can't give you the most up-to-date decision at the moment. The whole Crossrail project has been a complete and utter disgrace, in my opinion, not with the current management, but with the previous management. I think that they were very much about engineering and about building a very big hole and tunnel under central London. I don't think they ever had the expertise and the understanding of what else was needed, and that the computer system and the IT systems were equally important, and that both should have been working in tandem together, but they weren't. Obviously, Crossrail is delayed at the moment. We don't know. We haven't even got a date for when Bond Street will open. I fear that this current emergency will delay it by some months. I don't know, but I presume because of the number of people who will have not been able to come to work over a few weeks, that there's no doubt will be another delay. But we need this line open as quickly as possible. I am a great supporter of Crossrail 2, and I'm also a supporter of the Bakerloo extension that would go into South East London. And I'm also equally a supporter of the Trans-Pennine route and HS2. I think the only way we can improve connectivity, improve productivity, and improve our economy is through these vital large infrastructure projects.
One here from Eddie. When you were leader, I'm assuming this means leader of Westminster City Council, you said that you thought that in the future Oxford Street will be only 50% retail. Why do you think this will be?
Because of the changing habits of consumers, because they're going online so much. I think when I was leader, I wanted to ensure that future-proof Oxford Street. Oxford Street is the high street of the United Kingdom. It is an iconic street, and we need to preserve it as much as possible. But we have to move with the times, and we have to move with consumer behaviour. And therefore, I would like to see retail certainly protected across the whole of the ground floor, because that is what is so important to Oxford Street. And then give retailers and give the landlords, the property owners, the flexibility to do what they want with the rest of the building. So maybe it might be cinemas, it might be hotels. I would like to see more people living in Oxford Street. I can envisage in the next 10 to 20 years that we will have people living in Oxford Street in the higher floors. But it's so important to ensure that Oxford Street remains this vibrant, exciting, welcoming high street for the nation.
Question here from somebody who is remaining anonymous. The landlord and tenant relationship at the moment is fraught with problems. Landlords have fixed costs to meet, including loans, staff, etc., as well, and pressure is being put on them to cancel quarters of rent at the cost of millions of pounds. What support will the government provide for landlords that are unable to collect crucial income to manage their cash flow in the same way that tenants need to manage theirs? Well,
you'll be able to see a letter that I've written with the New West End Company and others, which is going out hopefully in the next hour or so, and we'll put it on my website, and the New West End Company can send it around later, which is asking the government for support for landlords and for tenants. And as I said earlier, it has got to be a partnership between the two. And I understand, and I've been making this point to tenants, that landlords are not charities. They do have their own borrowing. They have they're leveraged, and I am very concerned of some of the stories I'm hearing of the relationships breaking down between landlords and tenants. My message to tenants has been: work with your landlord. If you can pay your rent, then please do. Particularly if you are a large retail company, do not use this as an excuse not to pay, because it will have an effect on the smaller independent retailers. And this is a crisis, this is an emergency, it's a national emergency, and we are all in this together, and we've all got to play our part. So hopefully, if you see our letter that's going out this afternoon, then you will it'll give you some reassurance.
Question slightly away from the main theme and topic, but I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on it. What steps, and the person is remaining anonymous, do you think are needed to restart the residential housing market, and what are your thoughts on a review of stamp duty?
Well, I hate stamp duty. I think it's a complete and utter unfair tax. It should. I just don't understand why buyers have to pay it. If anybody had to pay it, it should be the sellers. But I'm not. But I am a Conservative, and I believe in low taxes. And I do think we've seen, particularly in central London, the damage that stamp duty did to middle market. It obviously brought house prices down considerably, and even in the luxury market, where our oligarch friends were having some major deals. So I do think we will. I am concerned about the residential market in the short term. Like all things, we have peaks and troughs, and I do think it will come back. But the more we can do to make it a fairer system and that we don't overburden it with unnecessary taxes, I think it's got to be a good thing.
One here from Svetlanda. What do you think the West End will look like in 5 years' time? What's your vision for our district?
Well, I hope it's going to be booming. I hope it's going to be full of international and domestic visitors and local people. I think we've got to encourage local people to enjoy their West End. And I hope that we will see, personally, I'd like to see lots of independent companies and shops and restaurants and bars, because that's what makes our economy so vibrant, obviously being supported by the bigger companies as well. But I am confident because the West End always comes back. It's had so many, bad times, from the Second World War, from major economic down times, and it always comes back. And I think it will come back this time, but it will take a concerted effort, and we will do it if we all work together in a very, very strong way.
Okay, there's an interesting question here. They haven't put their name to it, but what impact do you think the current situation will have on the issue of homelessness in Westminster, and what's your view on the best way that business can support them?
Well, many of you will know that I have been responsible. Well, I've taken an interest in rough sleeping and homelessness in Westminster for about 8 or 9 years. I was responsible for rough sleeping when I was a cabinet member, and then I took a lead on it when I was the leader. And now as the MP, I've made it one of my policy subjects to take forward. I'm very, very proud of the work that Westminster Council is currently doing, as the City of London is also doing. The City of London has not got anywhere near the type of rough sleeping situation, but it has seen an increase over recent years. But in Westminster now, we saw more rough sleepers coming into the city as lockdown was beginning, because people knew that they would get help. We've got several hundred people now in hotels. The government is paying for that. We've also then got wraparound services in a lot of these hotels, which is helping more and more rough sleepers turn their lives around. And I've been given anecdotal evidence by the cabinet member responsible, Heather Acton, of rough sleepers now reaching out for help like they've never done before, which has got to be a positive sign. My concern at the moment, and I wrote to Robert Jenrick last week about this, and I'm hoping to have a meeting with him tomorrow on the subject, is that we have now got several hundred people in hotels, more than we have ever had on the streets. We've got the GLA have put rough sleepers into Westminster and the City of London hotels, as have other local authorities. And what I'm calling for from the Secretary of State is for reassurance that we are going to not see a cliff edge system where lockdown is lifted and the hotel doors are just opened and people are told to leave. That would be the worst case scenario for the rough sleepers themselves, for residents and for businesses. So I'm asking for a plan. What is the plan to support these extra people, as well as the usual numbers of people that the councils are used to dealing with? What is the plan? Because that is, for me, a game changer.
Time for just 2 more questions. I think, Brian, you've already had one question, but we're going to give you another one. Brian Bickle, rent deferral for tenants also needs the support of the financial institutions which lend large amounts to property investors. There are 3 of us in this relationship. Does the Treasury understand that? And
that's one of the reasons why we wrote the letter, because the WPA has been really pushing this themselves to ministers and to me, and I've been doing it through the back door as well. I'm very conscious of the pension funds and the bond markets that lend these money to landlords. So yeah, I absolutely understand that, and I think that is one of our big issues that we're dealing with now.
An interesting one here from Simon from Van Halligans. Will the trading hours be staggered over a period of time, especially for non-essential shopping, i.e. more 10 to 6 sort of time scale, as the businesses ease back into the new normal for the foreseeable future? Really interesting point there.
very interesting point. I don't know the answer, but it's one of those issues that I will be working with the New West End Company and the retailers and ministers, because as I said throughout this webinar, is that it's very important that we work with those industries that need the help, the retailers, the hospitality industry, to ensure that we have a recovery that's going to work for them, is going to provide the confidence for workers to come back into central London, and for those visitors to come in and enjoy the West End again. So you make a very good point, and it's something that I am very, very keen to ensure that is answered.
Nickie, we really appreciate your time. Realise you're extraordinarily busy as always, but particularly at the moment. And thank you for taking time out to go through all of those questions so diligently. To you, the viewers, if you want to share this webinar with friends or colleagues, it will be available on the New West End YouTube channel and our LinkedIn page. If you have any ideas for guests or subjects that you would like to hear more on, do please let us know via email or the usual channels. Our next session will be on Wednesday, the 29th of April at the same time, 4 p.m. We'll be speaking to Jacqueline Windsor, partner in the Retail, Consumer and Leisure Strategy practice at PwC. She will be talking about changes in consumer behaviour because of the pandemic and the longer term implications for retailers when shops open. But for now, thank you for joining us. Goodbye and keep safe.